So let's get started. Welcome everybody to Provo Municipal Council meeting. Also we are going to be convening this evening as the Redevelopment Agency and the Stormwater Service District as well. It is 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means. It will be due to the risks of public gatherings associated with the spread of COVID-19. Governor Gary Herbert has waived the anchor location and certain other requirements for public meetings and noticing as outlined in Executive Order 2020-05. The meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at youtube.com/Provo City Council. The council requests that attendees help maintain the decorum of the meeting by silencing electronic devices, being respectful to others, and waiting to speak until called on by the council chair. In the current situation where the meeting is being held via Zoom webinar and broadcast over YouTube, I remind you to turn off your mics when not speaking so as to minimize the potential for background noise and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast. I'll begin by roll call, and I will do that for everybody present. I'll begin first with our City Council. I am George Handley, the Council Chair. I'm joined by David Harding, Vice Chair, and Council members Bill Fillmore, Shannon Ellsworth, Dave Shipley, Dave Sewell, and Travis Hoban. We are also joined by our Chief Administrative Officer, Wayne Parker, and our Executive Director, Cliff Strachan, our Council Attorney, Brian Jones, and other staff who are assisting us in this meeting. We'll begin with an opening prayer, and that will be offered by Mr. David Harding, after which we will have the Pledge of Allegiance, which, as we do it online, will be simply stated by one person, Councilor David Shipley, while we listen. So go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Father in heaven, we are grateful for the many blessings which we enjoy in this city. We are grateful for the good people who live here and for their efforts to make this community better. We are grateful for the country that we live in, for the blessings and prosperity that we enjoy. We are grateful to be able to gather and to govern ourselves through this system. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pray for wisdom, and we pray for the ability to represent the people who we have been elected to represent. We also pray, Father, for kindness, for greater understanding, for empathy in our community, across our nation, and around the world. We ask for a blessing upon the first responders who are dealing with the pandemic. We ask for a blessing upon those who have fallen ill and for those who are caring for them. We also ask for a blessing upon the many civil servants who serve the city, particularly for our public safety personnel. We ask thee to bless them in their responsibilities and help there to be better understanding in the community. And this we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Harding. Okay, Mr. Shipley.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I would like to take a moment as council chair to just say something before we begin our meeting. I want to address the shocking death of George Floyd and the recent protests across the nation and here in Provo and elsewhere in Utah. And I want to start by saying that as a white man, I recognize the responsibility I have to acknowledge the many small and large ways in which I am advantaged in this society. I feel it is my responsibility to be more aware of benefits that I don't deserve and to do what I can to increase and equalize benefits for all. I used to think when I was younger that racial relations in this country were on a kind of inevitable track of improvement, but I no longer believe that to be the case. I think every generation has to be very vigilant. Now, to say that racial bias exists in our society is not to point fingers of blame at any one person or group of people. Indeed, I think it is simply to acknowledge the fundamental fact of our human propensity to judge and categorize people by their race, their language, their gender or sexuality, their religion, their income level, their political affiliation, or educational or professional backgrounds, and generally to categorize in a negative way and to assume the worst rather than to see the best. And I think we're all vulnerable to this great flaw that is part of being human. And while it isn't always dangerous, at its worst, it can lead to violence and even death. We may not be able to escape bias entirely, but we certainly can become more aware of one another by listening, deliberately forging friendships across the various boundaries that divide us, and seek and celebrate both the common ground we share with others and the wonderful differences we each bring to the table. I didn't have time today to share my comments that I'm sharing with you with my fellow council members before the meeting. So I'm hesitant to speak for them, but I think I know that we are all united in our opposition to bigotry and racism, and that we strive as a council for a city community that is inclusive and welcoming of all people, and that protects and promotes the rights of all of our citizens. We don't always get this right as a city, as a state, or as a nation, but as a council, and I know the Provo administration, the mayor, and all the staff that work with her feel similarly. We are committed to working harder and to doing more to improve in this regard. For this reason, I am grateful for the protests we have seen in Provo, and I recognize the deep hurt and anxiety that has inspired them. I participated in my first protest when I was 17 years old, and it was terrifying and thrilling at the same time to engage in a public display of concern. It takes a great deal of courage. It's a wonderful American tradition. And we are especially grateful that thus far the protests have been peaceful. These peaceful protests have proven that protests don't have to be violent to be heard. And we are also grateful for our mayor and our chief of police, Rich Ferguson, who have already for the last several years been proactively working to create a safe and respectful environment for all. And I know that they're committed to maintaining and improving their efforts in this regard. Because as a city, we also lost one of our own officers, Officer Joseph Shinners, just recently. With honor and gratitude, we recognize that our police officers risk their lives every day for our safety, and we are immensely grateful for their service and do not take it for granted. I recently watched a video, maybe you saw it, of a Provo police officer and a Black protester hugging on Center Street, and it made me immensely proud of our community. I just will end with these thoughts. I'd like to encourage all of us to take this opportunity to be less reactive and resentful, especially of situations that play out elsewhere across the nation. Instead, let's be more proactive right here where we live. Let's make fewer assumptions and ask more questions of each other. With civility and compassion, let's listen to the concerns right here among our own. If you do not have friends who are of a different race or a different religion, get to work on changing that. If you don't know a police officer in Provo, start now to make those friendships. If you don't know our racial history as a country, I suggest you commit to read and learn more. And if you have concerns, approach us in the city and let us listen and learn from you about how we can better serve you. We are only as good as we collectively decide we want to be. So let's get to know the various communities that make up this great city, and let's commit to do all that we can to be more compassionate, caring, and inclusive, to be better listeners, and to be more careful and slow in our judgments. Thank you. I'll turn the time over now to Cliff Strachan, who's going to describe how public comment is going to work here in this format online.
All right. Thank you. You should see on the screen the items for which we'll be addressing the council tonight. Because the City Council is meeting virtually by Zoom webinar and is being broadcast via YouTube, there are neither council members nor members of the public present at Provo City Hall. This necessitates certain changes in procedure for those members of the community who wish to make public comment during the public comment period or wish to be heard during public hearings for those items requiring public hearings. To facilitate public comments where designated, we have enabled telephone access. The numbers for which will be shown on screen during the public comment or public hearing portions of the meeting. These also can be found on the YouTube page where the meeting is being broadcast and at provocitycouncil.com. Callers may have to try multiple numbers to get connected. When a caller is connected, they will be required to enter the meeting ID and enter the pound symbol. When asked for a personal ID, just hit enter at that point. The caller will now enter the meeting as an attendee and will be able to hear the meeting while muted. If the caller wishes to speak on the item being discussed, they can press *9 to indicate their desire to comment and then wait to be called upon. If called upon, they will be identified by the last 4 digits of their phone number. Each will then be asked to provide their name and city of residence before making their comments. Each will be given up to 2 minutes to speak. A timer will be posted on screen and a beep should be audible to the caller when their time is up. A required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but it will be limited to 15 minutes total. As is the council's tradition, 15 minutes have also been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. This open public comment period will start now. A reminder, there's a lag of approximately 30 to 60 seconds, depending on your internet connection, between the meeting and the broadcast. For callers, to avoid confusion, mute the YouTube and Facebook broadcast to hear the discussions in real time, even as the screen time shows a slight lag. Mr. Chair.
Sorry, we will wait then for 60 seconds.
And can we put the phone number up on the screen? Thank you.
All right, well, I think we've waited about a minute. We will proceed. We'll note that our first agenda item needs to take place after 6 p.m. By state law, actually. So we will move to item number 2, and if it is then after 6 p.m. by the time we're done with that, we will return to item number 1. So on our action agenda, we have an implied motion on item number 2, which is an ordinance amending Provo City Code to enact the very low density residential zone, which has citywide application, and this will be presented by Javin Weaver, city planner.
Thank you. So this is a new code to add to our zoning ordinance. We currently have the low density residential zone and a one family residential zone. And this zone is looking to kind of act as a buffer between said zones perhaps. The primary differences with the very low density residential zone and low density residential zone, which I'll refer to them as VLDR or LDR henceforth. The differences are for the VLDR is that we are going to allow 7 units per gross acre in this zone rather than 15 units per acre. We have 7 units that can be grouped together in one building. If with the amenity space, that is supposed to be mashed together to be more functional. And additionally, this does require that the amenity space be present for this for when there are 10 units, if they have a project of 10 units or more. Otherwise, most of the things are pretty similar to what we have currently in the LDR zone. Again, this is to act as potentially a buffer between one family residential and the LDR zone. Sometimes there's been a little bit of conflict or discussions about the LDR zone that might not be the best zone when adjacent to a one family residential zone. This zone is supposed to kind of fill that void. The LDR zone allows for up to 15 units, and this again is allowing for 7 units, and this may allow to ease some of the strain that sometimes the neighborhood has identified with certain projects. Additionally, with this zone, it would be like the LDR, MDR, HDR zones that the structure would have to adhere to the design standards. So in the end, we would have a higher quality product going in the neighborhoods. This zone would also work to possibly act as some infill as areas in the city could potentially be rezoned. It could help developers, citizens as another option that they could utilize, that not only they and or staff utilize when looking at rezoning properties. Are there any questions for staff?
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Any questions, Mr. Harding?
Yeah, looking at the very end of this, of the proposed text, section 14.14F.100. It's a notice of parking and occupancy regulations. It says that for projects over 2 dwelling units, a contract must be entered into between Provo City and the developer agreeing to determine occupancy based on a given number of parking spaces. And then talks about how that will be reported and whatnot. I'm curious, is there an equation that says, what that occupancy is going to be based on number of parking spaces? Because that's not in here. So is that just the judgment of Provo City, of our development director?
Yeah.
And if it gets recorded onto a covenant running with the property, as conditions change, and perhaps the number of parking stalls per occupant changes, it seems fairly inflexible.
The occupancy is based on 1 family or 3 singles per unit. The parking standards are based on 1437 from our section of code. So occupancy per unit would be 1 family or 3 singles.
Okay.
If there's 3 bedrooms.
Are you done, Mr. Harding?
Yes, there was one other that I had a question on, but I don't see it immediately. I was hoping maybe someone else would ask a question, but it was a more minor concern.
Okay. Well, we can come back to you if you have another question. Ms. Ellsworth has a hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just off of Mr. Harding's question, is that statement about parking and occupancy any different from our other zones?
No, this came from the LDR, MDR, HDR zones.
Okay. And then my other question is, how is this different from like an R10 zone?
This would be similar to if we were to rezone it to an R16, you could have 7.26 units to that acre. With the VLDR, you can have up to 7 units to the acre. And the other difference between the R1 and this is that you can have 1 family attached, 1 family detached, and 2 family attached dwellings, townhomes.
And in this one, you can only have attached.
You can have attached, you can have detached. So you could have a little bit of variety of housing types intermixed within some of our within neighborhoods with this type of a zone, which facilitates the general policies or general plan.
So the VLDR has the opportunity for mixed housing types, but the like R16 doesn't.
Correct.
Was there a question there, or was there a further comment? Any other questions from the council? Everybody seems frozen, so I'm wondering if I'm having difficulty.
Well, we hear you.
Can you hear us?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I hear you now. It seemed like everybody went frozen for a second there. Okay, so no further questions from the council? All right.
If I may, I apologize. I just barely found it. Shame on me for not writing this down earlier. For the height limit, maximum is 30 feet. The maximum main floor elevation is 30 inches above the lowest adjacent street curb elevation. I was trying to wrap my head around that. It seems like particularly if a property is sloped, you might have a fairly low street curb elevation, and that would limit. Sorry, this is 14.14F 070. It seems like when I read that, it seems like it's saying that your main floor can't be more than 30 inches above the lowest adjacent street curb elevation. So if it's on a slope, that would be very low. And if you site the house up further on the property, that would be problematic. Am I misunderstanding that?
It'll adjust with
This would just adjust with the topography. Again, this was also taken from the other zones for that specific 30 inches requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions for Mr. Weaver? So this is the first time this item has appeared before us to be considered. Does any council member desire to consider this item again at the next council meeting? Oh, I apologize. I've forgotten to open it up for public comment. That was supposed to be my next task. So we would welcome any comments from the public. I will give it a minute here to allow people to call in. Here are the instructions being posted here about calling in. I apologize.
Mr. Hanley, this one is a public hearing.
Okay. So we'll wait a little bit longer here. All right, we'll bring it back to the council for any further discussion. Any discussion from the council? So I'll ask again, does anyone desire to consider this item again at the next council meeting? Otherwise, it's an implied motion and we will call for a vote on that motion. All right, seeing no objection to, or no request to consider this item again, then I will call for a vote on the implied motion. I'll begin with Mr. Harding.
Yes.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore. I think you might be muted.
Yes.
Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
Yes.
Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
And I will also vote yes. Okay, excellent. So that was a unanimous vote. We are at 5:56 p.m. So by state law, we can't start item number one. We anticipating a lot of time on item number 3. Yeah, probably, right? Or at least more than that last item. Mr. Strachan, do you have any advice? We have 3 minutes. Is there a pressing need to, is there a need to avoid having to go?
No, but I say if you go and deal with it, then the planners can all go home at this point.
I do see a hand up by Aaron Wade. I don't know if that was in relationship to the item that we just closed.
You can check with him. I believe he's with, is he with that or is he with?
Yes, he's with item number 1 and would have a brief explanation for you if you care to hear it.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Are we? Yeah.
I just wanted to, the portion that cannot take place before 6 p.m. is the public hearing portion. That is required to take place after 6 p.m. So if there is discussion before the public hearing, that could take place now. And then you could hold the public hearing once it's after 6 p.m.
Very helpful. Thank you. Okay. So I will introduce item number 1 on our action agenda, which is an implied vote on a resolution approving a request by GT Medical Holdings to establish a public infrastructure district to finance the extraordinary cost of installing public utilities for the medical school and medical housing to be built on a former landfill, approving an interlocal agreement pertaining thereto, appointing a board of trustees, authorizing annexation and withdrawal within a defined area, and related matters. And this will be presented by Dixon Holmes and perhaps others. Mr. Holmes.
Thank you, Council Chair, Vice Chair, Council members. So this, as was stated, is a request by the developer of the medical school and medical school housing. This is a request that's been to the council on several occasions as a work item or study session item. An overview is the request for a public infrastructure district to be created on property owned by the medical school and the medical school housing. There is a very small portion or a 3-acre parcel that was considered in the property transaction at a future date to be made available to the developer should some criteria be met by the Army Corps of Engineers and our Stormwater Service District. That is not transacted, but similar to imposing a redevelopment agency or redevelopment area or district, it has a larger area and then the smaller area gets defined and refined. So there is a small parcel that has been included but would not have the district boundary applied to it until such time that it actually comes under ownership of the medical school or the medical school housing. But it has been included in the overall legal description but would not be included at this time if the council chooses to act affirmative on this request. An overview of the public infrastructure district is such that It allows for a separate taxing entity to be applied to a legal description to the property requested for the purpose of financing infrastructure and public utilities. This is an interesting or unique request in as much as the property, formerly a landfill, formerly a golf course, and now a proposed medical school and medical school housing. As a part of the new road that will be constructed, and a portion of that, or good portions of it, are under or over what used to be the former landfill, the extraordinary cost of removing all of that material and then bring in fresh fill material or clean fill material, and utilities and infrastructure has an extraordinary cost. Public infrastructure districts don't necessarily need an extraordinary cost to be applied, but in this case, that is the case, that there are extraordinary costs. Public infrastructure districts, or PIDs, was an item or a legislative opportunity created by our state legislature several years ago for financing, again, public infrastructure. The city may hear requests like this in the future. It would be our recommendation that they be only applied to commercial, light industrial, institutional, potentially multifamily housing, but not be applied to single-family residential detached housing. The purpose for that, or subdivision, the purpose for that is this is a tax that is in addition to property tax already being levied that the property owners would pay. And if you can imagine a subdivision or property to be subdivided by a developer for single-family detached residential applying additional tax to this, the ultimate taxpayers on that district would not be present because they don't own property yet. Those homeowners would not own the property. Now, true, it could be sold to others, but again, that may or may not be passed along. And where you have two property owners on two different parcels being the same developer but connected, this is a known quantity, and so there isn't any surprise going forward. We also have on the line with us outside counsel representing Provo City, who Gilmore and Bell, a law firm who helped put together this legislation with the state, again, several years ago. They're representing us today also. We also have the developer on the call who is making the request. The request is to approve an overlay of a taxing district, again, the public infrastructure district, that will provide them financing for the utility improvements on the property as an overview. If you have any questions of me, be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Any questions for Mr. Holmes before we open up for public comment, clarifications, anything? All right, so it's after 6 p.m., so we can open this up for public comment. And I'll ask that the staff post the phone number instructions again. And we'll wait a little bit of time here for comments, any comments to be made. All right. We'll bring it back to council for discussion. Mr. Fillmore, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Dixon to help us understand this just a little better. Dixon, could you walk us all through the financial mechanics on this? Use some large round numbers and help us understand the money flow on this tax-wise.
Okay. Can I actually defer to Aaron Wade with Gilmore and Bell, who's kind of helped put this together? I could probably go through some of that, but then they'd probably end up correcting me.
Yeah, I'm just asking for a hypothetical with large round numbers so we know how it works.
So again, the improvements that need to be put in, as I mentioned, are to have to remove the former landfill. That's more than $1 million proposition. It was not entirely known at the time what the cost would be, but certainly it was known that there would be some extraordinary costs. Those are now known. Quantity as far as the numbers to put on the property, north of $10 million to put in these improvements to remove the former landfill. What this does is this again puts a tax on the property that will then be generated to then offset the costs of the developer. They will bond for those improvements. The tax generated will then pay back the bonds for the developer over the course of the life. And I believe it's a 40-year term on the project that will run with the land that will generate that revenue to pay back the bonds over the life of the bond. Did that answer your specific question, Mr. Fillmore?
Pretty much. Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Other questions for Mr. Holmes or others who are joining us? Okay, well, we have heard about this item several times, so this is not, of course, the first discussion we've had about this. So I don't see any further discussion.
Can I, Mr. Hanley, would it be okay to ask if Brian Jones has anything to add to the conversation, the council attorney?
Sure. Mr. Jones?
I don't. I was able to review all the documents and work with Aaron and Dixon and Camille Williams in my office and others, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are, but I didn't have anything to add.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, seeing no further discussion, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. I'll begin with Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes.
Mr. Fillmore.
Yes, with the caveat, Mr. Chairman, I should disclose that I have done significant legal work for the medical school, Rocky Mountain University, in the past. Nothing significant in the last year or so, and nothing pertaining to this matter. I don't think that's sufficient that I need to recuse myself, so I would vote in favor.
All right, we appreciate you mentioning that. Thank you. Mr. Hoban?
Yes.
Mr. Sewell?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
I, George Hanley, will vote yes, and Mr. Harding?
Yes.
Okay, the voting was unanimous. Thank you, and to all of you, Dixon, and all of those who've worked on this.
Thank you, council.
I hope it does the good that it's intended to do. All right, we'll move on now to item number 3, since we already tackled item number 2, which is an ordinance, and again, another implied motion on an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 18.5 acres of real property generally located at 901 West, 1560 South, from residential agricultural, RA, and agricultural, A15, to one family residential, or R17. This is in the Lakewood Neighborhood, and it will be presented by Brian Maxfield, our planning supervisor.
Thank you. As we talked about in the work meeting, if we have the first map there, it illustrates the current zoning in the area. Let's see if we can have that come up. You can see the RA is more the olive colored green, and the, I don't know what the shades of green are, but the other green is the A15 zone, the one on the south side. This area, to orient you again, is just west of the Osprey subdivision. There are 3 long skinny pieces that are between the two. It attaches to an R18 zone to the north, and the Osprey is also R18. The request to R17, I apologize, I think the map says R1.17. It's kind of confusing, but it's in R17, there's a 7,000 square foot minimum. However, as we'll go over, the general plan for this area calls out a net density of 4 units per acre. So the applicant has reduced the lot yield to meet that 4 units per acre. Otherwise, he would have had, I think, 10 or so more lots on the site. The second map shows the southwest area land use plan that was adopted about a year and a half ago. You can see the yellow shows residential, which this would qualify under. To the left is an LDR that's along 1100 West. I think we're talking about transitional housing areas and other densities before the LDR to the west and also down to the east, southeast of this, allow for up to 15 units per acre, townhomes, attached homes, and other types of housing. So that's some of the nearby transition that could occur through this site. And then finally, the last map shows a layout of the proposed project, which shows a gridded layout and connections to the east, which would go to the Osprey subdivision, and one of the west, which would go to 1100 West eventually. Of course, those areas have to be developed first. It's pointed out in the staff report. One of the ideals is the area developing together. However, we do not have the desire nor really the means to force people into developing the property until such time as they're ready. In fact, the agricultural zone states how we support the agricultural use until such time as they wish to develop their property. That plays out in some of the items where the neighbors were concerned of the impact on the neighborhood from development, where not all of it develops together. The connections of the streets, as well as some of the things which would have to be done to bring this elevation up to a height above the floodplain for the area. This area is subject to the Utah Lake floodplain. Habitable floors are required to be 1 foot above that floodplain. And I think David Day's online could maybe answer specific questions regarding fill material and how the floodplain affects this area. The plan for this area, the written descriptions of goals and policies also talk about avoiding leapfrogging. That is kind of another problem here because it is not adjacent to the next property. However, it is adjacent to city services to the north and can connect to existing city services. Our belief is that a leapfrog really is if this project were further west on 1600 West or 2050 West, kind of isolated out in that area, surrounded by ag's land. We feel this is really adjacent to existing residential development and really is not a leapfrog in that same sense. I have, I guess, are there any other questions? Maybe I'll just go to that and see if there's something I could answer regarding this.
All right, Mr. Fillmore, go ahead.
That we've received that there appears to be concern about flooding, low floodplain here in the basement, flooding in the neighboring, what's the Osprey subdivision? What's the history there?
If David Day's on, maybe he could answer, but I checked with building inspectors and they're not aware of any flooding in Osprey because those elevations all exceed that floodplain level. The homes are, again, required to be built above that floodplain level. So if there's flooding, we're not quite sure where it comes from, and David might be able to address that.
Yeah, the flooding that we've heard about is to the east of Osprey in the Lakewood subdivision. Those homes are probably about 4 feet lower in elevation than Osprey or what Heron's Landing would be. So I think it's the elevation that is causing people to see the water. And we purposely raise these newer subdivisions up higher to keep them out of that groundwater elevation. So that'll be the reason why they have to fill in the area that they're building in.
David, are there basements in the proposed Heron's Landing?
That they are wanting to raise it up high enough that they would have a kind of it's not really a basement as you would think of a basement, but it does go down into the ground. And so it's kind of more of a split level type entry where part of the first floor is below ground level and part of it is above.
I take it you people are not concerned then about basement flooding.
No, in fact, we've kind of got rid of the term basement, and we just call it the lowest habitable floor elevation, because some of these will be like the backyards would be raised up, but the main floor, or I guess you call it the basement floor, would walk right out into the backyard.
Okay. And you're not aware of any incidents of flooding in the Osprey subdivision?
No, it would be existing homes that were built prior to the requirement to raise them up to that level.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Harding.
This is the first discussion that I heard about kind of that the R17 doesn't meet that 4 units to the acre. So it sounds like the request is for R17, but the site plan exceeds the regulations for R17. And so I guess my question is are we comfortable with zoning it higher intensity than what's being proposed? And is there anything that prevents, because it seems like we're looking at a site map that aligns with the development policies that have been approved for this area. And so I want to support it, but is there anything that keeps R17 densities from getting built after we zone it to R17? And I guess why not rezone it to R110 if that's what's intended to be built?
I think the intention was to try and get a variety of lot sizes. I think we're afraid of everything being cookie cutter. The R17 and the net density he's proposing, you'll notice on the east side and throughout the development, there's a variety of lots. 12,000s, 10,000s, the minimum really is 7 that are on that northwest upper corner. Those are some of the smaller lots, but I think this allows us to get that variety of lots so that every lot is the same size. If you notice Osprey, those are pretty much cookie cutter, the same size. So I think in the intention of the general plan to get that variety, that's some of the hope. And I think we've realized some of that with this project.
I appreciate that. I hadn't considered that. I didn't realize that was the intent. And I strongly support what we're trying to accomplish there. I guess still the question remains though, that's the intent, but is there anything that prevents, once this is rezoned, everything going in at 7,000 square feet?
Should I go to Brian Jones?
I guess you can, but I'm not aware. Is there a development agreement on this property already?
There hasn't been one proffered.
Okay, so then I guess the answer is no.
Okay, I really love what's being proposed. I am just a little nervous though that there's nothing that ensures that something following this intent actually gets built. So that is a concern of mine.
And I think that's a very good point, because it's really the general plan at this point, which is not an ordinance. in that sense, dictating that density, whereas the zoning ordinance itself doesn't have that. And unless the developer, offered something, I don't know if we're tied down.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. One is, I don't know, it's maybe for David Day about infill or filling in or whatever you do to raise the level above the floodplain. First of all, where is that material going to come from? Secondly, how safe is it? How standard of a procedure is it? Is this at all risky?
Yeah, so the fill material comes normally from various locations, such as new developments that are digging things out, like, and I don't know where they plan to get it, but for instance, the BYU Music Building will eventually have to dig way down, and there'll be extra material coming out of there. I'm sure BYU has a place for that, but similar to that, you'll have material being hauled in from another location to fill it in. Normally that material is higher quality material structurally than the material that exists on site. So if you were to dig in that ground that's there currently, you would encounter a clay mud really quick and then groundwater. So that is very poor soil. It doesn't have very good bearing capacity, and it's highly liquefiable. So almost any type of material that's hauled in will be better than that, and whatever they haul in would have to be suitable for building homes and roads on it. So we would watch that as they're hauling that in. We bond them for the improvements, and so we'll have inspectors out there watching them as they do this work, making sure they comply with our specifications.
All right, thank you. The question I have is about range of that we anticipate these houses. We have a sense of that.
I didn't catch that range of the prices.
Yeah.
Probably let the applicant address that. That's okay. I'm not quite sure their home prices are going up. So I'm not. I hesitate to call them affordable units, even though they're smaller lot sizes. But maybe he can give you the price.
I thought I read something in the report about being a higher grade housing development than in terms of the. I don't know what I'm remembering that I read, but something like that is, and I just wanted to get a clear sense of what kind of diversity of income you're seeing in this kind of a development. So, is the developer present to speak? I believe so, right? Developer is Chris Ensign, correct?
Correct.
Maybe.
Hello.
This is
Can you hear me? Okay, should we just go ahead? Mr. Ensign, do you want to?
Yes. Thank you. I wasn't sure if I appreciate. Good to be with you guys tonight. Couple of questions there. I think I can address a little bit. The R17 is due to those dimensions on the we'll call it the northwestern lots here that the code requires or allows for that depth of lot, and your catch or your provision that keeps us from not building more than that is, well, certainly we would build what we're showing you with very minor changes, but ultimately the guiding force there that we designed to is the net 4 per acre. So there's really not the ability to put more in because of that provision or ordinance that the general plan calls out. So if it were 7, I think we initially were closer to 70, I'm just going to say 72 lots. And once working through that process with the West Side General Plan process, the net component reduced it to, I think we're at 54 or 55 right now. Does that help with that question?
That was Mr. Harding's question. I don't know if he wants to.
Mr. Jones, our attorney, could probably address this a little bit clearer. I don't doubt your intent. I completely believe your sincerity. There have been times in the past, though, where situations change and projects change. And so I guess the concern is that the general plan or that principle, that the net of 4 is a guiding principle and doesn't carry the weight of law. And so, it perhaps would, if that's something that you're willing to commit to, there have been times where developers have been willing to make commitments to see that through, and that kind of development agreement, I think, could just last until the properties are built, and then it could expire at that point. But that, again, I don't doubt your sincerity in the least, but that 4 units to the acre is not an ordinance that is enforceable.
Certainly, and we're happy to work with whatever those mechanisms are to help put that in place. We've understood that was what it took at this point, and I guess I've only read that in the general plan and haven't read that in the R17 that we're asking to rezone to. So if that's certainly if a development agreement helps accomplish that, we can memorialize our intent with something like that. That's okay with us. And then maybe just for a moment on the material, I thought, thank you, David, on that. We certainly we would test the material that we planned to bring in prior to bringing it in to test for compactability, and then certainly David and his team would monitor our compaction as that would move forward and test it along the way with us, so that material could ensure the proper building standards. The best example is Osprey of what they've done. We would be very similar to how they engineered their property and how they carried out their homes, kind of a daylight basement or the lowest habitable floor. And then price range would be similar again to Osprey. I think that sold it very well. It seems to be the right fit for the demographic in the area. And so that'd be the best reference to what our plan and intention is to do it from a home size, price, and level of offering.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ensign. Any other questions for staff or Mr. Ensign before we open it up to our neighborhood chair and then public comment generally? All right. Thank you. We'll be coming back to this discussion.
I do think we have a raised hand.
Yes, I know. We have, sorry, we do, Ms. Ellsworth, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious if, I can't remember, did the Planning Commission approve the site plan? I think staff could answer that.
Yes, they did. They accepted the concept plan. They still would need a preliminary plan and a final plan before they could build.
But what we saw was the concept plan, and that was
correct,
approved. So we would just expect them to move forward with something very similar.
Correct.
So we don't really need a development agreement. That's my idea anyways. I think they'll move forward with this.
All right. We'll now give some time to Becky Bogdan. We did receive your email, Becky, earlier, which we appreciate very much. But please take a few minutes to share your thoughts with us and give us a report on the neighborhood response to this proposal. Go ahead. I think I've allowed you. Oh, sorry. Now you can talk. Sorry.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Sorry, this is a little weird for me.
But I didn't unmute you. So those are two separate functions.
Oh, am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted. Go for it.
Oh, okay. All right. The first question I have is, it is bordered on two sides with farm animals. It's a grazing property on both sides. And then on the southern side is bordered by the Lakeview Parkway, which is a 45-mile-an-hour road. One of the conversations we had over 2.5 years ago was fence lines there, if the contractor would put them in, and if so, would they be a little bit heavier graded so that the farmers that had animals there would be protected from. We have problems with little kids trespassing on farmland where there's animals, and the farmers are very concerned about what this means for their property. It's not just on one side, he's got it on both sides. Plus that 45-mile-an-hour road, are they going to be able to have that put in right away? The other concerns that they have are, we did have quite a few problems with Osprey, with them building up, and then there's that cutoff. The existing neighborhood was lower. And then they left that big cutoff on the western side of their property. And now we're going to have the 3 farmlands that are below that, and then another buildup. So that was a concern with the neighborhood as well. I did appreciate how in Planning Commission, Bill had talked about watching that really carefully, and if they needed to put in a retaining wall, which is what Osprey had to do, that would be done. That's just a real big concern, because not only water isn't maintained on their property, but also dirt and things fall that way. Some other concerns were, it's just kind of, it's like they're leaving us with a bunch of infill projects. Those 3 farmlands are really narrow. The width on those aren't probably much wider than what my house is on, what, a quarter of an acre, fifth of an acre. And so really, how does that develop from there? I know that there's, I don't know, it's weird. In the concept plan that's there's just a road right in that middle property, and there's no room for anything else if you go a north-south road. And then there's that 1 acre piece that Tony Kajanis wants to keep, and Tony's in his 80s, and if his family decides to sell that when he passes, how is that going to connect? Is it going to connect within the subdivision itself? In Planning Commission, they talked about having a little road. If there's going to be a road, I would like to see that in some kind of a proffer so that that could be maintained. Things like that is what the neighborhood has been concerned about, but we haven't been able to have a neighborhood meeting in 2.5 years. And so I humbly request that at least we have an open city hall. We haven't even had an open city hall on this one, that it can be continued for 2 weeks and do an open city hall and see if we can get some good neighborhood feedback. Thanks.
Thank you, Becky. We appreciate it. Let's bring it back. I guess I should have announced before Becky began that we would welcome any public comment as well. I don't see anybody who's called in yet. Maybe I'll just wait just a minute here in case anyone else calls. Let's bring it back to council for discussion. I'd like to ask Karen Tapahi to speak to the neighborhood meeting question as far as what's in the city code and what may or may not be necessary at this point or desirable. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I just wanted to mention something because there had been some questions about that, and it's something we are trying to sort out in the city code. It requires the applicant to contact the neighborhood chair to set up a neighborhood meeting once that application goes in and the notice goes out about specific types of projects. Now, there had apparently been previous applications, and this one that's before you is technically a new application. But from what I understand, from what Mr. Ensign said in the planning commission meeting, he saw it as basically an extension of a previous application. That isn't something we've ever addressed in the code, and so it caused some confusion on the neighborhood side because they were expecting, new application, at least something new was submitted in 2020, and they were expecting to have it come before them, whether it's changed over the last 4 years or not. This is, they wanted that opportunity. So that's kind of why Ms. Bogdan mentioned the neighborhood meeting part and wanting to be able to weigh in. It may not make a difference. The neighborhood meeting doesn't decide anything, but it gives them an opportunity to look at what's coming in and share their support and their concerns with the planning commission and the council and that. So it's something that has been kind of behind the scenes as far as how we address something that some may see as a continuing application, but because it generates a new notice out to a neighborhood chair, do we hold it up? We just haven't addressed this before. So I just wanted to add that explanation to kind of put any neighborhood emails, and especially what the neighborhood chair has been saying, in some sort of context, as far as what we have listed in the code. That's it.
Excuse me, I'm muted. Thank you, Karen. That's very helpful. Mr. Hoban, you have a comment or question?
I was just going to share my thoughts around a development agreement. Well, first of all, thank you to the developer for the time and just diligence in pursuing this opportunity. I like good single family homes are being built, that there's a little bit of variety in lot sizes and such. It sounds like the developer's trying to take feedback into consideration, so appreciate that. I would like a development agreement, not that I don't trust the developer, please don't take it that way. I don't trust the economy, and we never know which way things are going to go, and so I don't think it hurts to have something a little more solid. Just a best practice in general. Even in my business dealings, I make sure that we have good, solid agreements in place in all aspects, even if I trust the people I'm working with. It's just a good best practice. I do want to kind of back up Becky, or Mrs. Bogdan more properly, in her desire to have some feedback, a little more feedback from the community given the circumstances. And I understand that there was some confusion around, if a neighborhood meeting was needed, and frankly, it's a challenge given the COVID-19 situation as well. So I think it's, I guess I would ask maybe for staff's appetite to use Open City Hall for this, or if it would be typical for a development of the size for us to use Open City Hall, but I'd like us to consider that, just given the situation and the neighborhood's desire to maybe provide some more feedback. I guess one question that Mrs. Bogdan brought up, I know I took a tour out there of that area, and I know that some of the developments, and maybe it is Osprey, I don't know, have built kind of a dike. And is that part of the plan to have something that would potentially keep water out, other than just raising the homes up? I know that you put homes up on filled or infill, but Is that a concern? Is there a need for a dike? I know that there have been kind of dikes built in some of those areas.
Is that something I could address, or was that question to me as the applicant?
Yeah, sure. Whoever can answer it.
Okay.
That's fine.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as retaining, and certainly David Day would probably be, we must contain on site. That's the requirements generally. There's probably a number of practices that could be done to do that, but we certainly understand going in that we must retain on site. So those 3 farm lots between us would need to have protection from that, and to our west as well. So we're aware of that, and we'll plan for that. Could I mention maybe a few other items that came up, or is this the appropriate time for that?
Or go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, not my call. Okay.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut in. Okay. As far as the neighborhood meetings, maybe just a brief timeline on that. Like was mentioned, two years plus ago, I'm a little fuzzy on all the dates. We actually had 3 neighborhood meetings. As time progressed, mostly our project kind of came on hold, either because of sewer capacity constraints or the general plan. And I attended most of the general plan meetings. That included many of the large landowners on the west side of Provo there, to see and hear their input. And Bill Pepperoni did an excellent job just really polling or surveying the entire group of what their interests were, and what I heard mostly was that they would like that right to develop their land when they chose to. And then as this general plan progressed with densities and allocation and how everything would work, I just believed that everyone was there, a part of these discussions. I would see Becky and others attending these meetings, and I felt that the progression of going through those meetings was certainly a community effort, and everyone was involved. So it is true we did do a digital. I think that Provo had updated their application process. We did do it, but it was the same application. And I just assumed that they were informed and knew that, if anything, we'd gone from 74 lots down to 54 lots, and had adhered to all of the significant West Side general plan guidelines, and we're certainly aware of the concerns, and it complied. So that was kind of our hope, is that we were just still in motion as far as things went along. As far as the 3 farm properties between the 2 of us, Osprey and us, we have conducted kind of a site study. It's on that one of our concept plans there that kind of shows how the roads would function and how accessible it would be, and how it would all kind of operate one day as one. And it looked feasible to me, certainly, but we provided it to engineering and planning, and they thought that was acceptable. And then as far as the development agreement, I guess I'm not opposed. I think there is the tools there in place to oversee the lot count. But again, we're open. I wouldn't want that to slow us up from doing that. Although the plan does include what we're moving forward with. So I'll remain open to your direction there.
All right, thank you. Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I had a conversation, I don't know, today or yesterday. I think it was yesterday, with Gary McGinn about development agreements. And every time we create a development agreement, it just means that our code's not good enough. And we're creating kind of this little spot of, it's a zone, but there's unique restrictions. And then, how long are we going to remember that development agreement exists, and what's going to happen when it's not enforced? But with our code, expectations are managed on all sides, and it's consistent for administration to apply. So I'd be interested in Gary's thoughts on continuously doing or consistently doing development agreements. And then my other thought is, that when I talked to the neighborhood chair, one of our best neighborhood chairs, we discussed that it's not the role of the neighborhood program to change the development, but to give feedback. And where they have that opportunity to give feedback also in the Planning Commission and also in this public meeting, and hopefully on Open City Hall, I think that's a good venue if a neighborhood meeting is not available, because as the Planning Commission sometimes struggles to understand, and as other neighborhood chairs sometimes struggle to understand, the intent of the neighborhood program is not to change a development, but just to get feedback. And so I'm afraid that we might be empowering this negotiation between a citizen and a developer when the developer or the owner of the property, the applicant, has rights, and they don't necessarily have to comply always to the requests of a neighbor. So yeah, and I would just really appreciate it if we could put more things on Open City Hall and maybe update our code so that we don't have to have so many neighborhood meetings. And then we also need to manage those expectations of what a neighborhood meeting does and doesn't do, so that developers have a more clear idea of what we expect. And then if they can move forward more quickly in our processes, it costs them less, and perhaps their housing becomes more affordable. So still interested in Gary's ideas on development agreements, if he's available.
Gary, do you want to comment? Is he here? Actually, I didn't.
Or maybe Brian knows.
He's not on the call.
Yeah, I apologize. I wasn't in those conversations with Gary. I know that is his feeling, though. It's almost, I think with any planner, how do we fix the code so we're consistent and we really get what we need instead of needing development agreements? That's something I agree with.
And I would just weigh in and say, I think I've said the same thing in meetings before too, especially if we're worried about things like lot size and stuff. And I'm not saying that, not suggesting that development agreements aren't a tool that can be used in the meantime if there are problems with the code. The one that gets thrown out all the time as an example is it's one thing if you've got a zone that allows gas stations and medical office buildings. This is the frequent example, right? And you want to do a development, the council wants to ask for a development agreement because they want to ensure that they're going to get a medical office building instead of a gas station. That's probably pretty hard to fix in the code, and maybe, something where a development agreement is entirely appropriate. And I'm not suggesting it's not appropriate here, but to some degree, when the only thing we're doing in a development agreement is imposing new development standards, then I would agree with what Ms. Ellsworth and Brian and apparently Gary through hearsay have indicated that the best solution would be to get our zoning code right so that we don't have to rely on development agreements. But again, that doesn't mean that if there's a hole in the code that a development agreement couldn't be used in the interim.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. I would like to also go on the record of saying that I agree that development agreements are often used when our code is insufficient. And that was where my comment earlier was coming from in the earlier meeting when I mentioned that I was, I guess, disappointed that we did not have a zone that could better implement the principles, the policies for development in this area. I think if we had, I think this is a perfect example where the policies say that it should be 40 units to the acre, but we have to go to an R17 to accommodate the differences in lot sizes, which is what we'd like to get. But the problem is, and Mr. Jones, correct me if I'm wrong on this, or actually, not if I'm wrong, but if you could weigh in a little bit on, help me understand with the site plan or the initial plan that's been submitted, how much does that hold the developer to what is proposed at this point? Because my understanding is that that even though it's proposed 40 units to the acre, if we rezone it as R17, there's really nothing to stop the developer from putting in a new plan that would develop it to R17 standards. So really the reason why in my opinion, the reason why we might want to might not want to zone it R17 without some sort of assurance that that's what that we're going to get something built that's lower density, and I think even just a commitment on the number of units that are going to be built, will match that 4 units to the acre. That's all I'm looking for. And I think the nice thing about this is that this is not an ongoing agreement necessarily that needs to be remembered in 20 years, because once the lots are built, that kind of locks it into place. So anyway, so I guess, Mr. Jones, what is there anything that would prevent, if this is rezoned R17, is there anything that would prevent it from being developed as R17?
No, that you're correct in that. With this caveat, I suppose, and this may be what the developer is thinking, is if they have an approved project plan, then they can't build anything else other than what's on that approved project plan without submitting a new project plan. But there's nothing that prevents them from submitting another plan that complies with the zoning and getting that approved because it complies with the zoning, and then building whatever that is. And you are right that I think most of you are aware, we did our training on development agreements not too long ago, and I had given that same training a couple times to the council before. We have done, I think as a city, much better in recent years at not doing development agreements anymore that run with the land, but just our standard template does not include language that makes it run with the land. It just includes language that says that it runs until the building permits or occupancy permits are issued. And so that is something that I think is better than what the past practice was, and applies in this case, if that's the way the council wants to go.
I have a different question. I'm not quite sure who to direct it to, maybe Mr. Ensign, but maybe also David or Brian Maxfield. There's a shopping mall in Orem, and this is just one example of many of this kind that you might be familiar with. It's called the Orchards. And every time I drive by there, I kind of laugh to myself because my ancestors were the owners of that orchard that is no longer there, right? And so the name of the place is almost an ironic joke rather than an honor to its past, right? Because the orchards were massacred so that a shopping strip mall could come in. And there was one comment in the report from a neighbor that mentioned cranes, and I can't remember what other birds. I don't know that herons were mentioned, but that this is a frequent location for some bird populations. And I know that the river restoration project is underway here shortly, and this is going to have a positive impact on the bird population. So where I'm going with this comment is if the name Heron's Landing, and I know this sounds petty, but I think it's a pretty serious point. If the name Heron's Landing is serious, I would hope that the development actually is going to provide something for the bird population if it's necessary. I don't know the ecosystem well enough to know whether or not a development in this particular location will in fact negatively impact bird populations. But it is a beautiful place, and it has a history, and it has an agricultural history. It has an ecological history that's beautiful and important to our community. And I would hate to see the west side of Provo just get developed and just sort of obliterate all memory of what it once was, right? And least of all with names that almost ironically point to that past rather than actually continue it in some way. So maybe my comment's a little bit unfair because I don't really have anything in particular in mind. But I guess my question is, has there been a serious study of whether or not this is going to impact the bird populations in that area? And if so, is there any way that this kind of a development can provide space for the birds, or some way in which it actually still functions, I know, as some sort of landing or some sort of interface with the ecology of the area rather than just being sort of indifferent to it. So I'm welcome. I would welcome any responses to that from those of you I mentioned.
Councilman Hanley, you've piqued my interest now. I don't think we've done a serious study on that. I wouldn't be personally able to speak to what impact it would or would not have. Currently, there's not a lot of opportunities for them to land as is. There's not a lot of trees on this site. There's a couple. I've heard from some of the neighbors that along that dike along Osprey, there are a couple neat nesting locations over there, but we are more than happy to include something. It's a great idea. And I don't quite know what that answer is just yet, but I like the direction and your idea there. And we will look into it and see if we can't. I don't know how to put that in something, but yeah, I think it's a great idea and it's kind of fun. So we're happy to do that.
Thank
Can
you.
I add something that when we did the road out there, the original name of that was, well, the project name was West Side Connector. The name of the road now is the Lakeview Parkway. As part of that study and an environmental impact statement, all of the wildlife was studied and all of the impacts that would be as a result of the road being built were identified. And so we had direct impacts for wetlands, and we mitigated that with, I think we had about 3.5 acres of wetland impact. We mitigated that with 20 acres of improved wetland. So that was quite a bit more than is normal. It was probably like a 7-to-1 ratio, which used to be a 2-to-1. In addition to that, the wildlife people wanted around 1,000 acres of indirect mitigation, and we didn't have access to that many acres, but we bought the majority of the property south of the Lakeview Parkway for indirect mitigation. So most of that property south of the Lakeview Parkway is owned by Provo City, and you can look that up on the parcel maps and see which parcels those are. Those are forevermore preserved as in the condition they are, so that the birds have a place to nest and land and live I guess, endangered by subdivisions and other things. So that was set aside, and whether that helps with your decision or not, I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, I would. So I guess what you're saying is that the environmental impact was mainly with regard to the road and with the anticipation of the developments that we're now looking at. I mean, was it just the road, or was it also the housing? Sorry, I muted you, David.
I'm back with you now. So the anticipation was that that development would come south to the road, but the fear was that development would cross the road and go further, because there is potential for that. There are some properties south of the road that are upland. They're not wetland, and so the agencies involved wanted to try to make the road the division line so that there was nothing going to happen as far as development south of the road. And I think we put a really large dent in that with the city's efforts to acquire all of that property. There's, I can't remember, I think about 200 acres of property that we acquired south of the road that are preserved for wildlife.
Excellent. That's very helpful. Thank you. Ms. Ellsworth.
This is purely anecdotal information, but I also appreciate birds and wildlife and consider myself an amateur birder. And I go out to this area regularly, and everyone I see out there birding is looking to the south of Lakeview Parkway. And it seems like that's where the majority of the wildlife I've seen is. So I think we've protected the right spaces.
Yeah, I guess I mean, it sounds like there was a study, so that's helpful, David. You know, and to Mr. Ensign, if there's anything, I don't know, I'm not really, you know, I guess with the assurance that there's some land to the south that presumably if there was an impact on the bird population, that it would maybe be mitigated by that land to the south. But anyway, just keep that in mind. You know, I hate to see the history of this area be erased by development. I'd like to see development that in aesthetic ways or in terms of design, in terms of maybe, you know, open space or corridors that are created that just help live in a healthier way in balance with that area, and recognizing the qualities of that land. I mean, it's hard enough that it requires this elevation from the floodplain, which creates the kind of artificial barriers that Mrs. Bogdan was describing. I mean, you know, I guess once you develop enough of it, then maybe some of that ugliness goes away, but it's still is an area that's sensitive enough that I think it seems valuable to develop it in a way that pays tribute to and in a serious way that the location it's in. Any other comments or questions or discussion on the council? This is the first time this item has come before the council, at least in a technical sense. I guess we were discussing that earlier, but I think it's fair to say that it's new to us now. So if any member desires to consider this item again, they should let us know now. Mr. Harding.
Thank you. So my preference, I do feel like this is not a routine item. So I think it would be appropriate to have a second hearing. I think that also gives the opportunity for an open city hall meeting or open city hall item to be posted and to collect public input that way. You know, assuming the developer, I think he's indicated a willingness to make a commitment to keep the unit count to 4 units to the acre. That those 2 weeks could also allow that to be drafted, and so that would be my preference.
I assume that is a formal request.
Sure. Yes.
Well, seeing that at least one person feels that way, I would actually concur with what you've said. We will continue this item then to our next council meeting, and explore the possibility of an open city hall, perhaps, in the meantime, right?
Mr. Chair, I think, I'm open if staff wants to correct me, but I believe we could make that request in this meeting now. So it's clear that, if the council would like to see that item be on open city hall.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I would like that. There was a question about resources and time. Is that something the staff can tackle in the next little bit?
I let Karen speak to that, but I would think that if you have 2 weeks to go before the next meeting, and you simply direct us, and you could probably do it either by a motion or unanimous consent or something. But if Karen can handle the time, I think we can do it.
I feel like we have sufficient information on this project to put it on Open City Hall within the next day or two. So yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. And I'm pretty sure that Mrs. Bogdan would get the word out so more people can take a look and weigh in.
Excellent. Okay, you're saying we need a formal motion, so I guess I would move. It sounds like I would move that we create the open city hall in the next short while, in time for reconvening in 2 weeks. Is there a second on that?
I second that.
Okay, any discussion? Do I need to go through one by one? Do I have to do that every single time?
On this one, I would think I would ask for just a voice vote if you think you have a majority, unless Brian corrects me, but I think that would be fine. I think we get the intent. Does anyone opposed to it? Is really
any opposed? All right. So we will. That will be our motion, and then we will consider this item again in 2 weeks' time. All right, we'll move on then to item number 4 has been continued. So we'll move to action agenda item number 5, which is an ordinance an ordinance adopting a budget for Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020 and ending June 30th, 2021. In the amount of $292,939,096. And this will be presented by David Mortensen, our budget officer. Mr. Mortensen.
Thank you, Chair Handley. So as you know, this tonight is the first of 2 public hearings that will be held on the proposed budget. Just to give you an idea of where we stand, nothing has changed in expenditures since we delivered the budget to you and since you adopt the tentative budget on May 19th. So there's no major changes at this point. I did want to show, John, if you could go, I don't know if you have the next page, page 26 of the budget document. I want to keep my comments kind of brief, but I did want to show this page and kind of outline what makes up that roughly $292 million in the budget. This sheet I like a lot in the budget. It gives a really good overview of all the different funds, revenues, transfers in, expenditures, transfers out, and the effect on fund balance that the budget will have. I wanted to focus today on just the expenditures column. So that would be the 3rd column in. That's mainly when we're talking budgets, we talk in amounts of expenditures when we tell you the amount of the budget. So for the general fund, as you can see there, the total amount of the proposed budget is $60,713,226. Below that, you can see various other types of funds. I won't read all of these numbers, there's a lot of them, but enterprise funds total $171,656,185. Capital improvement funds, and this includes only those capital improvements that are not related to utilities. They would have capital improvements included in their specific budget. So this is just other capital improvements such as BNC road projects, engineering road projects, other general capital improvement projects, and parks and recreation projects. Those total up to $16,614,394. Below that, special revenue funds such as the Covey Center, the cemetery, emergency response, which is our dispatch, the justice court, the library, the home and CDBG grant administration. Those all total up to $14,324,178. And then I can't see the bottom here. Can you scroll down a little bit, John? Debt service funds include telecom debt that's still being paid off, ERP, which is our software that the city uses for finance and soon to be work management and customer service, and then our general debt service. All of those combined equal $12,476,754. And then our internal service funds, these are funds that serve other funds within the city. So customer service, our employee benefits, vehicle replacements, facility services, telecom, insurance and claims, and vehicle maintenance. All of those total $17,154,360. And so that gives you the breakdown of what makes up that $292,939,096. With that, we'll open it up to any comment that the council has or questions that you have. Other things to consider that were brought up in work session earlier today that Cliff brought up regarding encumbrances or unspent balances after the budget year is over and how those are treated. Other items that are found in the budget ordinance are up for discussion as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mortensen. Any questions from the council? I will open it up for public comment since this is a public hearing. Wait just a minute here to see if anyone will join us to ask any questions. This is the first of 2 public hearings as required by law. Second hearing will be on June 16th in 2 weeks' time. All right, we'll bring it back to council for any discussion. Any discussion from the council? Well, lest the public believe that this is something we take lightly and are just passing by, we've been discussing this now for couple of months and going through this in some detail. So this is something that we're already pretty familiar with. So seeing no discussion, I'm a little confused here. We're not passing anything tonight, right? I do have on my notes that there's a call for a vote on the motion, but this is the first of 2 hearings, correct?
Correct, and probably an oversight on our part about the call for a vote. But if you haven't, the only place you would consider having motions is if you were making any changes to the budget at this meeting.
Okay. All right. So absent any proposed changes or any discussion, we will move on then to item the next item, which is on our agenda, which is actually as the redevelopment agency. So if there is no objection, we will now adjourn as the municipal council and reconvene as the redevelopment agency of Provo by unanimous consent. And I will turn the time over to Mr. Sewell, who is the chair of that of the RDA.
Thank you, Chair Hanley. Vice Chair Ellsworth will be conducting this item for the RDA tonight. So I'll turn it over to Councilor Ellsworth.
Thank you. There's just one item. It's a resolution adopting a budget for the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020 and ending June 30th, 2021 in the amount of $1,299,333. And that will be presented by Mr. David Mortensen.
Thank you, Vice Chair Ellsworth. So the screen showed a different number, but Ms. Ellsworth had the number correct. It is $1,171,617 for the Redevelopment Agency of Provo. This again is the same number as what was presented on May 19th and tentatively adopted. I don't have any other commentary on it. This is the first of two public hearings, just like the other budget that was proposed. So tonight and then June 16th would be the final hearing and anticipated adoption. So with that, I'll open it up to any comments or questions that you have.
And just to clarify, did we get the total amount correct?
Yes, $1,171,617 total.
Okay, in our notes, it says $1,299,333.
Yeah, I believe that was a typo. So the number you see here on the screen, the 1.17 million over toward the right in the middle for total expenditure, that should be the correct number.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
This item is open for a public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment?
No one has currently joined us, but we can wait 30 seconds.
John, a reminder to put up the phone numbers when we call for a public hearing, please.
Okay. Hopefully that's enough time if anyone wanted to comment. Is there any discussion from the RDA board on this item? This is the first of two public hearings as required by law.
That's probably enough time now. And just a reminder that you can always reach out to Provo or council@provo.org with your comments, and all three budgets will be reviewed again for public hearings on the 16th of June.
Thank you, Mr. Strachan. Mr. Harding, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I had a quick question. The past couple of weeks or past couple of meetings, we've also been discussing an emergency loan assistance program. And I've gone a little foggy. Is that part of this proposed budget, or would that be a separate appropriation?
Yeah, that is not included in this proposed budget because there was some question whether that was the appropriate direction to go while we're evaluating Karis funding and the potential use of some of that funding for that purpose. So we left it out, and we could always do a budget appropriation at a later time if it was deemed necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Someone needs to unmute Mr. Fillmore.
Hello. Just a question about the current status of the Karis funding. I understand that funds are being held up by the county commission and not released as expeditiously to the municipalities in the county as we'd like. But what can the administration tell us about that?
I would defer to Wayne if he's still in the meeting. if he wants to share some information about that.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Fillmore, the county commission is actually meeting with the mayors on Thursday evening to work out the final details on the distribution of the funding. We are not 100% sure yet in terms of exactly how that's going to play out, but the feedback we've had from the county thus far indicates that their intent is to follow, in general, the outline of the state and other and Salt Lake County in terms of distributing the funds to cities in 3 different tranches over the summer, and allowing the cities then to begin to expend those funds for COVID-related expenses, which could also include the business loans, or could include a number of other things that we're currently exploring. So I think we'll know a lot more by the end of the week or the first of next week.
Okay, thank you, Wayne.
Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, staff, is this an implied motion?
It's an implied motion, but it's also there's no motion to be had tonight.
Okay. All right. Well, we will hear this item again on June 16th, and we will vote on it then, I suppose. And that's all the business that the RDA has.
So now the motion will be to adjourn as the redevelopment agency and adjourn as the sewer district.
Reconvene as the stormwater.
Yes.
Okay. So is there a motion for that?
Yes.
Well, you can just say if there's no objection, we will now adjourn as the redevelopment agency of Provo and reconvene as stormwater service district.
Okay. If there is no objection, we will end our meeting with the RDA and reconvene as the stormwater service district.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Ellsworth. And I will want to make a comment for the public for these items related to the budget. We have one more to do here. Open City Hall is open currently, soliciting comments on the budget. And so if you didn't get a chance to make any comments tonight, that's a good place to submit your comments and maybe look at the budget at your leisure and give us your feedback. So we encourage you to do that. Okay, so as the Stormwater Service District, we will now turn to item number, in my budget it says item number 10, but on the screen it says it's item number 7. I think that's because of some things that have been continued. But, this resolution adopting a budget for the Provo City Stormwater Service District in the amount of $6 million, $6,704,839 for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2020 and ending on June 30th, 2021. And this will also be presented by Mr. Mortensen, and a note to the public that we will be offering an opportunity to make public comment here very shortly.
Thank you again. Yeah, so this proposed budget, again, there's no changes from the May 19th tentative budget that was adopted by the board. So the total amount, as you stated, is $6,704,839. I don't have any more commentary to add to that, so we'll just open it up for any discussion.
All right, thank you. We'll open it up for public comment, as this is a public hearing, and the first, as we've said before, the first of 2 public hearings that are required by law. Second hearing is scheduled for June 16th in 2 weeks' time. So we'll wait just a little bit longer to see if any public would like to call in. Maybe we need those instructions again. All right, seeing no public comment, we'll bring it back to the council for any discussion. All right, there is no discussion of this item. Again, these are all items that we've looked at before. So we will be looking at these again, having another public hearing in 2 weeks. That, my friends, concludes our evening. So if there is no objection, and I've never yet had any objection to these words, but if there is no objection, councilors, you will want to turn on your mic and speak up if you object. We will now adjourn the Stormwater Service District by unanimous consent and conclude our municipal council meeting this evening. Thank you all very much.